A few weeks ago, I watched a footage from an international development forum where African leaders were gathered. Representatives from donor countries were also present. There were speeches, cameras, lights, pledges, several millions of dollars as aid, several applause. At some point, an African leader stood up and said, "We are so grateful to our partners for their generosity," and some other applause followed, and you can imagine how that the room would be. And at that moment something struck me, and it's not because aid was offered, but it's in the way everything was framed. Africa was visible, but only as a recipient. It was present but not positioned as an equal. That was troubling. Africa receives aid, grants, loans, and handouts, and this has been a reality for decades. And the real question, the worry for me, is not even whether Africa receives aid. It's about, what does long-term dependence do to the African image if we keep depending on the donors and the ones who give handouts, both in the future and in the now? Now, let us be clear. Aid has saved lives. Emergency interventions have saved millions of lives. Humanitarian intervention has been so very necessary. So we are not debating whether aid is important or whether aid is good or not. But what begins as support can quickly become some kind of structure. And when aid becomes structural, it stops becoming a temporary tool, more like a stopgap, but it starts becoming an identity. So Africa slowly shifts from being seen as a contributor to the collective global progress to being seen as a permanent humanitarian project. And so when Africa appears on the global stage every time to basically request aid, negotiate debt relief, seek intervention, there's a certain framing that we put in these countries' minds. So Africa becomes associated with crisis and not capability, need and not negotiation, charity and not contribution. And this affects our global credibility and even confidence of investors in coming into this space to invest. Most importantly, it affects how Africans see themselves and how they project themselves out there. Dependency does something very subtle but really dangerous. It shapes our expectations, weakens our systems and government. You find government being very lackadaisical in taking decisions. Accountability suddenly goes out the door and things just break down. I mean, the thought would be, why fix the system today when someone else is going to fund it tomorrow? Why do we have to fix it when this is a major source of income? So over time, dependency trains society to manage failure instead of designing success. And we see this play out in IDP camps and the tons and tons of NGOs that have come up in Africa in recent times to manage some kind of humanitarian crisis or the other. And these things never get solved because we always position ourselves as the ones who need help and the ones who need these interventions. And these NGOs never really solve the problem, but they have built structure around the problem so that they can always position themselves in the place where they get the funds and they pretend to be solving the problem, whereas they're just managing the crisis and maintaining status quo. Aid dependence does not just affect economics, it shapes our political consciousness. We become very less sovereign actually because we tend to get signal from abroad because those are our funders. Remember, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. Ultimately, this weakens the democratic culture and delays reform and development. So Africa often borrows to fix problems that they created by themselves, and then they spend decades trying to pay back this loan. So debt servicing limits policy freedom, it exposes the weaknesses of the government, and it limits the sovereignty of the state itself. So when budgets are designed around repayment, development becomes very slowed and constrained, reforms become very difficult. Nothing really works because we are thinking of paying back loans instead of thinking of building structures and systems that is going to sustain us in the future. If Africa seeks liberation from all this, then reform must be deliberate. First, Africa must strengthen domestic taxation, resource management, and financial transparency. Second, Africa must prioritize trade over aid. We should think of intra-African trade. We should think of accelerating what Africa 2063 is trying to achieve. We should think of value-added production and increasing our industrial capacities as a continent. Thirdly, strong institutions. Aid flows where institutions are weak. Respect flows where institutions are strong. So we must prioritize building strong systems and institutions. And lastly, I'm going to say that we need a new global posture. Africa must stop presenting itself as a problem that needs to be solved, but as a partner that presents solutions and brings solutions to the global table. It should be in our consciousness that no region, no nation in history has earned global respect by total dependency. So aid should be a stopgap and not a destination. It should be something that we need for the now and not something that we rely on for even our future. Africa has the population, resources, talent, creativity to stand very tall in the world. And so what is missing is not potential. What is missing, I would say, is design. Designing systems, sustainable systems and structures to actually carry Africa into the future we deserve. Africa does not need pity. Africa needs power. Now, not power over others, but power over its own structures, its own systems, and its own governance. Reform is not about rejecting help. It's about refusing to be permanently dependent. Because visibility without dignity is not progress. It's just another form of calamity. And so Africa must get it right. And I'm sure we will get it right.